I just want to begin by telling you why I was excited to read this book, to not only own the book, but to share it with other family members. I heard from one of our participants in California that they recommend it to a homeschooling group consortium, and I think that's really great. I have three sons, the oldest who's 15, the middle who's turning 13, and the youngest who is turning 11 within the next few months. And particularly our middle son just latched on right away. It's, in graphic novel form. But I think the illustrations, and I'm going to talk about the author, John Hendrix, a little bit, why I think it invites readers so winsomely into this both history, but even, things I'm still learning about when it comes to literature and history. So enough kind of selling it to you, if you will. I hope some of you did get a chance to read it. Because it's so illustrated, I couldn't avoid putting this presentation together. So bear with me as I put it up in a moment here. So The Mythmakers by John Hendrix. Kind of credentials there I think are important. Chair of Master of Fine Arts and Illustration, as well as Visual Culture at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm holding up a postcard that John Hendrix made for something called Hutchmoot. Hutchmoot was a gathering during COVID of like-minded authors and artists and creative types that some of you have heard of the Rabbit Room and the Peterson brothers, Andrew and Pete Peterson out of Nashville, Tennessee, huge Inklings fans, songwriters, and artists in their own right. And during COVID, they had a brilliant idea of gathering others like they had in person before to something they called Hutchmoot. And so when we were gathering as a board last year to decide what to read, this book was highly recommended on C.S. Lewis related lists. And I recognized the name and some of the artwork and said, I'd really love to have us read and consider it. So that's a little bit about the author, John Hendrix. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about other works that he's done. So I also have hard copies here, but you can see on the screen at least The Holy Ghost and the Faithful Spy, a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A website there if you'd really love to look at his other works. They include books about Jesus, Go and Do Likewise, Parables and Wisdom of Jesus, as well as Miracle Man, the Story of Jesus. I think my wife, Stephanie, who some of you just met earlier on the screen, she had found the Miracle Man, the Story of Jesus years ago as well. So that was another kind of point of contact for us with the work of John Hendrix. And then another one which I intend to get for one of my sons at some point is an early book of his called Drawing is Magic, Discovering Yourself in a Sketchbook. And so if any of you have read that or seen that and can give any feedback, I'd love to hear it. But I look forward to enjoying more of John Hendrix's work. So let's jump into the book if that sounds good to everybody. Right away, as you open the front cover, there's just some really neat, I'll even use the Christian language of Easter eggs as we sometimes do. There's hidden things. Right away, if you get I think it's only in hardcover, but the hardcover has this door labeled Joy under the book jacket. And there's the initials of CSL and J.R.R. right on the door. So it's just a neat touch along with many others in the book. And right along the first page, after you flip open the book, you see C.S. Lewis meeting J.R.R. Tolkien, introducing themselves, and kind of foreshadowing of the whole plot. They recognize that they share an interest in Norse mythology and the joy that it brings. And so that's right away on the cover page. But then by the time you get past the table of contents, you're introduced to characters of a wizard and a lion. And another thing to note as they're having tea by a fireside, by a hearth, is that they begin to agree to join a quest to plumb the depths of myth. And as they agree to go on this quest, they face these doors, including this door with the word joy on the front, and it is the door that they choose. And the narrator invites us into, as they are aware, they're in a story. And right away, you see these elements of these myth makers coming out in these two characters that are the leaders of our journey through the narrative. And I just don't want to keep talking. Does anybody who's read it already, anything that you noticed right away, just in that first kind of introduction to these two characters? Any idea who the wizard and lion represent? It may be so obvious, but just for fun, anyone curious?
Well, a wizard character might be Gandalf, I suppose.
I think you're onto that, Bob. Anybody else who might the lion evoke?
Wouldn't the lion be Aslan?
I think so, and I think you're right.
But it's also alter egos for the two protagonists.
Right.
I don't have that page, the introduction.
The introduction starts right after, yeah, the table of contents. I'm not sure that the numbered pages. Yeah, I guess on page 1 it's labeled.
Mine doesn't have numbered pages either.
There's 2 pages of the meeting, but that's it.
Right.
Yeah, just meeting. Well, there it is. There it is. But mine doesn't say introduction.
I've just labeled it the introduction. So
Oh, that's your label. Okay. I'm
that's
sorry. All right.
no,
That's
it's okay.
why.
That's sorry if that threw you. So good.
Yeah,
We cleared that
yeah.
up. I'm calling everything before chapter 1 introduction. So
I've got it. I've got it.
excellent.
Okay.
I'm glad we've cleared that up.
Good.
So, yes, as our alter egos and literary figures lead us on a journey, I just think there's some great narrative introduction about, yeah, the rich worlds and fantastical writings of our two main characters, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And yeah, they not only go through the door labeled joy, they go further in. So there's puts all these kind of allusions to well-known quotes from the best-known works of Lewis and Tolkien in here. And there's even a nice kind of glossary of British terms in the back that he includes. So if he uses a kind of Britishism, and Mark, I saw you in here too. You know, if I try and botch any of them, feel free to correct. But there's a kind of a nice wink to an attempt at authentic language in here. So just had to say hi to you too, Mark. I'll keep going. The Hall of Myth and Epic includes portals, and I know one of our in-person attendees in California mentioned these portals, and it's just another inviting kind of plot supporting device. It includes, as I put on the slide here, we can see already pretty in-depth discussions of the history of myth and epic. So already these two characters in seeing this hall full of well-known Western, but even more broader global historic myths and legends. There's even a moment where they get attacked by a minotaur, and the wizard says, "I sent him to the back matter." And I wondered what that was when I first read it, and it turns out there's kind of another Easter egg. He appears in the very back indices pages. So if you didn't notice that, that's where the wizard sends the minotaur. So these portals are not only wonderful for deeper, more specific learning, but it kind of reinforces the adventure of the book that you're on. And right below the kind of clip of the page that I put up, I want to read a quote. "Myths are traditional, ancient, often supernatural stories told by humankind, stories that, with the telling, unfold something about a culture's history or belief system." And so the wizard and the lion actually kind of get into it a little bit. They are sparring in some ways right away and setting the stage for the kind of both initially friendly, but even kind of sword sharpening dynamic that will then be unfolded in the story of our historic figures of Lewis and Tolkien. And one more point, these portals, there's 3 of them in the book, and the first one begins with Dr. Thistle. And in, again, near the back, some of the acknowledgments of John Hendrix, he says that Dr. Thistle was inspired by Dorothy Sayers. So again, for those of you who read it, I didn't pick up on that right away till I read that in his acknowledgments. And I thought that was another interesting point, that this kind of teacher of the history of myth is inspired by Dorothy Sayers. So just an interesting point. If others noticed that and had anything to say, I'd love more input from those even more learned than I am on all things Inklings, but just some neat aspects about the book.
Well, what struck me was the graphic. His graphics are very kind of iconic But it kind of reminded me of things like totems or something. I mean, it's very, the darkness of them and the kind of the expressions there remind us of these kind of, totemic or some of these other kind of mythic society drawings, graphic pictures that you see.
Bob, it reminded me when I led our reading of Fantastes from one chapter from MacDonald, just kind of that room of statues and, yeah, as you put it, totems. Yeah, it's a visual feast. You can tell I'm a big fan already of John Hendrix' work, but yeah, I think there's much richness in his just very detailed illustrations. Anyone else have anything on kind of the introductory, not only a dark cavern, they go down a well to the Tree of Tales, which is my next slide. And I want to show you that illustration again.
My question is that the same as the tree he sent to the sketch people? What you call it, sketch moot?
It's not, but I'll show you after we're done. And
Okay.
it's a different one that he did at Hutchmoot, it's called.
Hutchmoot, yeah, okay.
Yes.
That's not the same tree.
No, but you can see the resemblance in his artwork for sure.
Yeah, but look at what there's some dark branches in there.
There are. Do you know why? Do you recall?
That was
He-
fair.
The branch of the writing style.
He calls them fairy tales.
He was fairy. Well, actually, fairy, I think is the title. If that's Tolkien uses, or someone uses the phrase fairy, there's a little more.
Yeah,
broader.
branches of fairy,
Mhm.
Right.
which is really strange.
Tell me why, and tell me what strikes you as strange.
Because they're dark fairy.
Mm.
I've been reading dark fairy stories for the last several years,
Mhm.
and they're really quite wonderful. I don't know if that's what he's referring to. Angela Carter, Sherry Tepper, A.S. Byatt. There's a Russian, Ludmila Petrushevskaya,
Mm.
whose title story is called "There Once Was a Woman Who Tried to Kill Her Neighbor's Baby."
Oh my.
These are dark stories. These are not for children.
Right.
I mean,
Which
Well-
in some ways acknowledges the wider canon of what, I'm sure is often debated, but encompasses the longer history of
Yeah.
story. So
Fairy did not start out as fairies.
no.
Louisa May Alcott has an excellent book of fairy tales that are very sweet and loving and wholesome and should be read to everyone's children. They are lovely fairy tales.
But they're not Faerie.
No, they're not dark fairies for sure.
Fairy is kind of a land or territory by these creatures that is not human-centered. Overall, humans enter there at the risk because they kind of follow their own rules, kind of the longevi. Lewis calls them, I think, by the longevi, these kind of creatures that are in our world but are kind of got a special relationship there. I said you enter there at your risk because they have their own rules.
So the second portal of this book includes a very long, wonderful kind of historical survey of fairy story. And Penn, your question about why is it purple or darker is actually related to the author's really wonderful device of linking his framing of both the life plot of Tolkien and Lewis in both purple and yellow, or a kind of indigo and gold. So I wondered, I don't know definitively, it'd be fun if the author were to be asked at some point if that's kind of an allusion specifically to Tolkien's plotline. I don't think it is, but that's a point not to be lost in the reading of this, because as you'll see in just a moment, he really uses these two shades, these two color palettes to differentiate between Lewis and Tolkien. So those are my speculations. I don't know if he's implying something that's dark about them. I do think in the second portal, which we're kind of jumping forward to a little bit, but I think in the second portal, it gets at everything we've mentioned here. I'm looking at it right now on pages 192, 3, 4, and 5. And yeah, it includes references to Perrault and I don't say the French well, de Aulnay, Grimm, Dickens, gets at some of the history of novelization. There's a Portal 2.5 as Gene the raccoon is kind of digging around, and it gets into the difference between popular and obscure fantasy and fairy. So this is not, let's say, a book the author designed just for kind of the amateur graphic novel reader. It includes plenty of academic discourse here in the back as well. So
It's not a simple biography.
no, no. I mean, the direct quotes from the authors have little asterisks after them, which is another beautiful part of it. So
I
I've
think it's a great way to inspire people to read great literature. And there's so many times I read a book because an author I know it was influenced by it. And then I go back and I find that book and they were inspired by somebody and I go back in time and I find that book. And this book, I probably wrote down 6 different books I'm gonna go get. Based on things I would like to read now that
yeah,
are additional information that I found out in this book.
yeah.
So I have a question about the tree. Is the tree to indicate the world of fairy tale?
It is called the Tree of Tales, and I think, Eric, the only thing I would amend, because I think you're right, is that it's not specific to fairy tales. And so, yeah, as the tale continues, and they say the tale begins by jumping ahead, which I'm going to do now.
Because it occurs to me that maybe his idea for that tree comes from the northern idea of Yggdrasil, the world tree, right? And so he's saying there's a world tree of tales.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong, Eric.
Mhm.
How specifically right you might be, I don't know, but I don't think you're wrong. How's that sound?
I love it.
Well, chapter 1 begins with beginnings. And for those of you, again, who haven't been able to see a copy of the book, you can see again the artist's style in framing 2 childhoods marked by loss and ruled by imagination. And as Jack and Ronald would be brought to the threshold of war, these introductory chapters may remind us of both Lewis's biographical notes from Surprised by Joy and many of the chronicling of Tolkien's early life. In Birmingham and in Northern Ireland, we just have these wonderful illustrations that I think, you have Ronald and Hilary, his brother, on the one side, and Jack and Warnie on the other. There's that tin box where some of their imagination began to be kindled as young boys. And yeah, the loss for Tolkien, both his father and mother, and for Lewis of his mother as well, the things they shared in common. It's not an incredibly lengthy chapter, but it does give just enough. There's been so much, written about, and so much that I hope many of us here tonight would already know about the biographies of both of these 2 authors. But I think really for those who are really new to Lewis and Tolkien's background, it's just a wonderful, really succinct summary.
You know what he does? He's given me a whole bunch of new things that I did not know.
Wonderful.
I have not read Carpenter, but I read Surprised by Joy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new stuff in here. That thing with I had not remembered that Warnie thing with the dirt in the tin box with the plants. I loved that.
Yeah. And no, there's, even for me too, I felt that way. Now, on Carpenter and his legacy of biography of Tolkien, I recommend to you the work of Holly Ordway, if you haven't.
Yes.
Yes. So she's wonderful and helps correct a few things that Carpenter has been known for, but deserve a little correction. So just my own plug there for Holly's work as well. I hate to keep moving, but I always have this problem when I host everybody. I get so excited and I don't get us through. So keep me going if you can. I had my own side notes here, Pen, too. A little speculative, but I kind of like on Tolkien whether he was bit by a spider, I guess, when he was just learning to walk. We can read there.
That's one of the things I didn't know about.
So this is where the author might, others might debate whether this is true or not, but the author puts this little side box about the fear of running through hot grass from an unknown terror might be perhaps there's the subjunctive. Perhaps this is the explanation for the ominous dread and role of spiders in Tolkien's work. So I thought, oh, that was interesting. And then another interesting note was his drawing of the Great Knock of Kirkpatrick, Lewis's and his brother and father's tutor. And you look at the historical pictures. I Googled quick what he looked like in person. This is a very charitable drawing of Kirkpatrick, a very kind of almost kind, gentle version. I thought, I wonder if Hendrix is kind of showing how Lewis would later give such a kind of appreciative description and memory of Kirkpatrick. But
Well, Hendrix is making the point that the contrast to Wynyard School, he loved Kirkpatrick because he didn't beat him. You know, he was strict and tough, but anyway, I thought there was a huge contrast. And he said that Lewis spent more time describing his horrors at Wynyard than he did the horrors of the trenches. That's new. I never thought of it that way before.
I think in the narrative, it points out that it's more than half of Surprised by. It's an insight into Lewis's journey of self-reflection. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Penn. Anyone else on those early days for our authors? Again, my goal is to try to give you just some insight into these drawings here. Chapter 2, Dead Marsh, is a reference to the location in the Middle Earth, the Lord of the Rings, near Mordor, as it explains what both Tolkien and Lewis share in common in their experiences in World War I. And I just put up this one illustration of Second Lieutenant Jack Lewis and his Sergeant Harry Ayers. It's just, in some ways, I think, both age appropriate, but vital for us not to forget what that generation faced through both world wars, but particularly for both Tolkien and Lewis in the trenches, just the horrors that they experienced and the influence it would have on their whole vocation and way of relating to one another. And I'm going to do my best to keep track of the chats, everybody. But if you have something, feel free to also mention it to us verbally too. So Penn, I appreciate that. So if you're not in the chat and you want to notice what Penn's put up, some great stuff, earlier comments on fairy tales, but also some things on Holly Ordway. So thanks for that, Penn.
Some of us can't see the chat because it's teeny tiny, so it's really better if people just verbal speak, please.
We are recording, so what's great is you can go back to be able to watch, but I think the chat might be lost. So if you do leave something there, feel free even at the end to let us know if there's a link or something of particular note. So I'm going to keep going here. Chapter 2, again, that focus on the world wars, and much like chapter 1, it does a nice summary. And again, the artistry is just historically sensitive and an honoring and fitting way of capturing that terrible season that not only these two men, but all of Europe really went through. Chapters 3 and 4 I've combined because I think they follow a nice shared line, Stab of the North and Horns of Elfland. So just like that very first page of the book has them meeting, finding out they both are interested in particular Norse mythology, and these allusions to, in many of Lewis's works, particularly these expressions of, yeah, you don't need me to kind of go into all of it, but some of you know already why those chapters are titled the way they are. But in these chapters, we see, beautiful sketches of Oxford, 1926. There's a couple of pages, 64 and 65, which kind of nicely summarize what happens after World War I, kind of the loss of meaning for so many who lived through that experience. And what these two kind of budding scholars were doing when they were joined historically. And we have from Lewis's journals the exact date. It's May 11, 1926, where from Lewis's diary, it's recorded. And yeah, there's some speculation again, but I wanted to put these two images here from corresponding pages of just what John Hendrix imagines it would have looked like. The front cover is this image on the right that you see is kind of the same image captured And so here it is, this image of them walking through the streets of Oxford, but on the cover, it's that same moment kind of captured in fairy, in Middle Earth or Narnia, if you will, on the front cover. So just another neat thing that I think the author kind of puts in his illustrations through allusions and kind of circling back. I plan to read it again, not just with my kids, but for my own sake, because I know there's things I missed going through it the first time.
There's a great quote in the very beginning, which I think is funny when you see this page and you see the C.S. Lewis with the big eyes. That he says, "Nothing I suspect is more astonishing in any man's life than the discovery that there do exist people very, very like himself."
Yes.
And I love that quote so much.
What is one of the four loves of friendship, right? It is, what is Lewis? How does he describe it? Someone help or correct me on this, but seeing the same thing, looking in the same direction at the same thing, and that shared perspective and adoration, the joy that the wizard and the lion walk through the door of. It's the joy that they share. Lewis already had it in chapter 1. It mentions his friend Arthur Greaves, and kind of as Lewis was discovering himself as a young man, it was that early recognition. And yeah, he may have been tutored into a hard-edged rationalism, but this chapters 3 and 4 already get at particularly Lewis's faith journey. Tolkien, in some ways, his life so transformed after the loss of both of his parents by his priest really taking him in as family, and just that deepening of his faith in Birmingham and the Newman Society there, and again, the impact that would have on this friendship. So yeah, that's where Portal 2 comes in, as the Tree of Tales is found again by the wizard and the lion. And so they get into this history of the fairy tale. And as chapter 4 continues, the Horns of Elfland, it talks about just some of the joy that they experienced in the buddings of what anyone know what the first kind of reading group was called based on Nordic myths? Does anybody have that name?
Coal biters.
The coal biters.
Yeah.
Why were they called the coal biters, Eric?
Sitting so close to the fire to listen to the story.
And is there an allusion there as well in terms of the Nordic myths? Is that similar to some word that I didn't know in Norse or something?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Just how close to the fire they would sit.
Yes.
Got it. We are invited on the left-hand side of the screen to see a moment that I thought was beautifully captured. Not only this kind of lobster in heavy armor, and I wasn't sure. I was going to ask if anybody else knew why John Hendrix would choose a lobster particularly. Lewis knew he could choose to take off the armor, he writes, you can see at the top of the screen, but was there any significance to why he might choose a lobster? Is there something in Lewis that he alludes to, or is that just an author's choice there? I was curious if anybody would know.
Is he quoting Lewis, or is he just saying that? His sentence is, "It felt as though he were encased in a suit of heavy armor, almost like a lobster."
Well, I think that's the author's, that's not a direct quote.
So he's making a picture of what that means to him.
Does anybody know if that is something that Lewis alluded
I've
to?
never heard it.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
so.
I didn't think so either, but
He's illustrating his own thought, a suit of heavy armor, almost like a lobster.
yes,
He's combining it.
right. So just wanted to make sure.
I think it's whimsy just to illustrate the idea of a carapace covering you, so.
Right. Good. I'm glad I wasn't the only one who was curious about whether that was something invented by the author. But I think we're correct in that. Because usually he's very consistent in, if there's a direct quote, having that asterisk right after it.
Yes, he's very good at that.
Yeah. So we see that image of the most reluctant convert in all of England, which has the asterisk. You can just barely see it at the bottom, but there is that asterisk of Lewis's direct quote there. And then on the right, we have the moment, right? So there's not only the beginnings of the conversion of Lewis, but the Hobbit origin story where Tolkien has to look out the window at his kids playing outside while he's grading papers in the summertime. And one of his students doesn't even realize they've left the back of a page blank. And on the back of that page, My notes are kind of covering it up, but that blank page has the very first words, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And just kind of, again, wonderful capturing of these moments in Lewis and Tolkien's lives. And then, as I'll show on the next screen, the famous Addison's Walk, where Hugo Dyson, along with Tolkien and Lewis, walk in the evening. And again, John Hendrix says he believes it's one of the most important single conversations of the early 20th century. And I just want to show you these illustrations where you can see the three on the left-hand side, and Lewis is arguing with them about the truth of myth. And there's this moment on the right-hand side where the wind blows through the leaves of the trees, and just a powerful moment about the true myth and why how should we summarize it? It's so powerful. I lose words, and I think the author does a good job of trying to capture. We write myths because our hearts were written by a myth maker, is one quote further down or on the next page from the right-hand side of our screen.
Picture is definitely evoking the John's talking about the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
The wind, and it's like something critical is said, and all of a sudden you have this wind coming through there. So I think the author is being very deliberate with that.
All the myths pointing to the one true myth.
Right. That's right.
As far as timing goes, it wasn't very late night. It was extremely early morning, I believe, was the time frame here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Eric, if I misspoke, he probably has that correct in here.
Well, it says that Lewis didn't leave until 3 a.m. and that Dyson and Tolkien stayed together talking. So it's sometime probably between like midnight and 3 a.m. that all of happening. So a little bit of both.
Past their bedtime.
Past my bedtime.
Bedtime. Yeah. There you go. The next image I wanted to show was what I think it happens almost in the published middle of the book. I didn't count the pages, but a climactic moment. I wondered if this was the crystal from the wizard's staff even. But the near all-night conversation I'm reading on page 96. That evening so stirred Tolkien, he composed a poem for his friend Jack called Mythopoeia, which means myth making. And these two keyholes on the right, again, representing their lives and the way in which this conversation and everything that had led up to it really had a profound impact. And just some of those direct quotes from Tolkien on the left-hand side, just to read them here to enjoy it, if you bear with me. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues, and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind, though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods and their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seed of dragons. 'Twas our right, used or misused, the right has not decayed, we make still by the law in which we're made. So the wizard and lion keep journeying through the lives of Tolkien and Lewis, and there's the moment just a few pages later of Warnie and Jack taking a motorcycle ride to the zoo, and at the end of the ride, the moment where Lewis describes how at the beginning he was not a believer in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and when he reached the zoo, he believed. And again, just a wonderful moment to capture and picture for those who have not yet heard this kind of famous moment in Lewis's life. So those are chapters 3 and 4. Again, the more I kind of revisit as we're going through it, the more I just hope this inspires you, if you haven't yet, to find a copy and look through the illustrations particularly.
Two things. One is Dan Hamilton posted a quote from Surprised by Joy that says, I was wearing some stiff clothing like corsets or even a suit of armor as if I were a lobster.
Dan, I knew it. I'm so glad.
So that's one where he did not give an asterisk, but Dan found it for us. Thank you.
Dan, I got too confident. I was like, I'm going to.
And second, I was reading the introduction and hoping they would mention that poem, Mythopoeia, because that's what it's about, the different views of myth.
Mhm.
And that's where that poem, where you were quoting the lines from it, those central lines. It's a
Mhm.
long poem. It's hard to read actually, but it's worth some look at, because it's Tolkien explaining or trying to explain to Lewis that myth is much more significant than you think it is.
Mhm.
Lewis had called it lies breathed through silver, and that's what triggered Tolkien into talking about splintered light and secondary creation
Mhm.
as myth making, mythopoeia.
No, thanks, Penn. Dan, you got to chime in now. How how much did you already know when we went down that tangent of failing to trust our wonderfully researched author?
Oh, I just looked it up.
Okay, thanks.
I found it on my Kindle
Perfect.
fairly quickly. Most of my library is downstairs, but I have the Kindle with me.
And by the way, so good to see you.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So continuing on to chapter 5, everybody, mere inklings, right? We have mere Christianity, a reference to the mere inklings. I love this illustration of kind of, it reminded me of the books I read as a kid where you would look into buildings and then, the kind of wall would be removed and you'd see what was going on inside. And I thought this was just such an inviting and sorry for my picture quality. These are my own pictures I've taken of the book illustrations, everybody. So I hope it just gives you again a glimpse of some of the inkling figures that would meet at the bird and baby, the eagle and child in Oxford, some of them coming all the way from London, just the camaraderie. We've in our society read in-depth biographies of the Inklings. Some of us have even visited the pub itself. I don't know if anybody has an update on our California philanthropist effort to update and.
I was just looking that up. They don't have anything new except, the Ellison is creating the Ellison Institute of Technology and acquired the Eagle and Child and was, as of 2 years ago, they were refurbishing it and adding a restaurant, but I don't see any updates.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about the developments of that project in Oxford. There have been many who've made their way to that same spot. Just a quick, another shout out to the Rabbit Room folks in Nashville. If you're ever driving down Highway 75, if I'm not mistaken, through Nashville, and you get a chance to take a detour to this Rabbit Room, I believe the fireplace that was in one of Tolkien's residences has been brick by brick reconstructed in the Northwind Manor just south of Nashville in Tennessee at this place, the Peterson brothers. They took a farmhouse down there and they turned it into a reading room and a concert venue, and they've got Tolkien's hearth there. So if you're ever in Nashville, look up the Northwind Manor and you won't be disappointed. So chapter 5 is a wonderful chapter about kind of the origin stories of how these Inklings would read their works together, the kind of controversial influence of Charles Williams, and just the very beginnings of what this book's plot then details as the relationship between Lewis and Tolkien goes through some challenging seasons. Williams having an impact on Lewis's interests. Lewis had already had some sparring with other members. Yeah, and thanks, Dan, for those links in the chat. So again, if you are on your computer, if you're on there, you can see those chats. For those who can't, again, just links about Tree and Leaf and Mythopoeia, the poem. So thanks, Dan, for that. And in chapter 5, we see, some vivid illustrations about the kind of leap of climbing a tower and flying on a dragon and what Tolkien would write about when it came to eucatastrophe and the meaning of how escapism really as a inherent good, because what it does through its consolation and recovery is provide really a way to move not only from a longing for joy, but into joy itself, really an escape from death, as the illustrations in chapter 5. Just a wonderful discourse in illustrated form for, I'll just say, for as a parent, I think of my own sons and the way I long for them to not only interpret culture, but to allow Christian faith and its claims to be a lens through which all things are understood and viewed. And eucatastrophe is this wonderful word that Tolkien has given us to understand how to navigate the full range of emotion, both not only in literary worlds, but in the world we live in. And where sorrow and joy meet, but where joy ultimately is the wiping away of the tear. And sorry, you're getting a little bit of my preacher coming through, everybody, but that's
go for it. It's good stuff.
that's a bit of my interpretation of what our author is doing with not only telling the history of the Inklings, but how the wizard and the lion understand what what Tolkien particularly is trying to get at in The Hobbit, but how they both encourage and challenge each other. And some of those dynamics that happened in those meetings of the Inklings wasn't always an easy place to read your creative work, as some of you have heard about and read.
Yeah, his story about how The Hobbit was published. I mean, he just has all this wonderful information curated from much wider field that most of us have not been able to read, and I just trust him that he's got it right. Almost by chance, The Hobbit had found a publisher. The typed manuscript had been lent to one of his students. What a great story. Anyway, I really enjoy his close biography,
right,
detailed, along with his literary sort of overview of what's going on.
Yeah, Pence, totally agree. Alice, you ask, what is the name of the place in Nashville? The North Wind Manor. It's an allusion actually to, of course, I'm blanking.
McDonald's at the back of the North Wind.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Alice. And Dan's going to chuckle at me for blanking on George McDonald's name there. I'm talking a lot. Anyone else want to chime in? Those who've read it or have a copy in front of them, what'd you think of? I mean, Penn, I've really appreciated your contributions. Yeah, sub-creation we're introduced to as well as a term. There's just so many of these, how should we put it, deeply studied terms from Tolkien particularly, but even from Lewis, that, to treat them in here in a way that doesn't interrupt the kind of plot line, the comic plot line, is really just masterfully done. I mean, it's just such a...
I had a question that came up thinking about sub-creation there, because I always associate sub-creation very strongly with Dorothy Sayers.
Yeah, Mind of the Maker.
The maker there. I'm not sure sequentially there. He seems to credit it to Tolkien, I think, if I remember. But
page 124.
I'm not really sure if that's the case chronologically, but or if they separately, independently came up with that idea, or if they're both getting it from somewhere else. He did kind of ignore Sayers' whole, her major book that talks about the mind of the maker and sub-creation there. So I've also heard it in other contexts, in Anglican context or something. So does somebody here have a little better handle on that issue about this thing about sub-creation, that whole vocabulary where that?
Well, if you Google it, Tolkien is who comes up. Tolkien's sub-creation theory.
There's a footnote I'm quick checking out. So this is page 124 where the author, I'll just read it for you guys who don't have a copy. It says, writing stories to Tolkien was a holy act. In fact, he felt humanity's desire to take the created order and rearrange it into new worlds was ordained by God. He called it sub-creation. And there is a direct quote at the bottom of the page. It says, we make in our measure and in our derivative mode because we are, and it's that quote, I think, again, as we read from Mythopoeia, we make in our measure, Tolkien, page 66, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. Now, is he quoting from someone else? Let me look here.
No, he's probably quoting from the essay Tolkien wrote called On Fairy Stories, which was given and then published in a collection after the death of Williams called Presentations to Charles Williams.
I'm just concerned that Dorothy Sayers was getting slighted in this treatment here.
Yeah, I think that's a fair, Dr. Thistle notwithstanding, a fair critique of any attempt, Bob, to summarize. But yeah, as far as the origin of, who began talking about subcreation, that'd be another interesting road to walk back on. Anyone have information from Bob's curiosity?
I have one comment about the illustration right here. He calls it mere inklings and shows the eagle and child. And that's kind of furthering the misconception that the inklings met at the eagle and child, which they did not. The
Right.
inklings proper met in Lewis's rooms, although they frequented that pub, but they also frequented a lot of pubs. So
Sure.
Yeah, they met twice a week. My daughter, when she went to Oxford, they told us from 11 to about 1:30 or 2, they would meet at the Eagle and Child. And then Lewis would go to his place in Magdalen College, Magdalen or
Right.
Magdalen, and then he'd spend more time there, the two of them. And that's where a lot of it was created. But the Eagle and Child, they got a lot of publicity because Bill Clinton publicized it. So a lot of myth making happened after that.
Right, but my point being that the group, the Inklings, only met in Lewis's room. Of course, they met each other in different places in Oxford, but not as an organized group.
Okay, I was told, again, I went there and I got the tour from Oxford. My daughter spent a year there in 2005, that they spent Tuesdays from 11 to 1:30 or 2. They talked about it and then continued it in his room. So they did talk part of it there.
I thought it was a different night they met in his room. I thought the author talked about that there were two aspects to this group of people. Let's put it that way. There were two contexts in which they met.
I just want to acknowledge that Harold is correct. Even the author has this on page 106, and you can see on the image Tuesdays at 11, the Rabbit Room at the Eagle and Child, and then page 112, it mentions Thursday evenings at Magdalen College in Lewis's room. So
He was a professor, yeah.
right. So
and that's the
you're correct.
official Oxford 2004-2005 tour.
So our author seems to confirm what you've heard, and vice versa, Harold.
Thank you.
But Eric's point is that as far as the kind of official history of where the Inklings would meet and how it came about, I mean, our author also does give us more detail on page 108, acknowledging there were women writers who the Inklings much admired. So Bob, there's another shout out for Dorothy Sayers and Ruth Pitter. Sadly, women were never part of their official meetings. And I know we've talked at our society and read authors who've acknowledged the influence of many of the women Inklings as well. Eric, any other final thoughts on
No.
the illustration here? There is another one which I don't include on page 113, which looks like it's meant to evoke Lewis's rooms at Magdalen too. So in fairness to the author, he did his best, shall we say.
Well, having lunch on Tuesdays could be a very different thing than getting together and having deep discussions and reading to each other on Thursday evenings.
Right.
And the subcreation, the C.S. Lewis Institute has an article about it and talks about it as Tolkien's theory of subcreation, that Dorothy Sayers then took the analogy much further in The Mind in the Maker. So they seem to be crediting Tolkien with the origin of that concept, and then Dorothy taking it and pushing it even farther forward.
So there you go, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, everybody.
Yeah, it's an article called Subcreation or Smuggled Theology by David Downing on January 3rd, 2010 with the C.S. Lewis Institute.
Wonderful. David is we're fond of his work down at the Wade Center and Wheaton College. So that's wonderful.
But he's not there anymore.
Is he not? I didn't know that.
No, he and his wife moved. I don't know where. There's a new director.
Got it. Thanks, Eric. I want to help us finish on time. I just checked the time. We're
Good luck.
okay. We've got another hour. How's everybody feeling? Any other questions or comments related specifically to chapter 5 and the mere inklings? if you want a very in-depth and thorough biography of the four kind of most mentioned Inklings, including Williams and Barfield, along with Lewis and Tolkien, the Zaleskis have written a massive book, which I, in self-critique, did not do justice to, and we discussed it many years ago. So anyone who wants to take up that biography again and lead the society through that, it is massive and it is full of much detailed information. So just for your future reading and reference, a wonderful biography on the Inklings. Moving on to chapter 6, and this is where I hope we can have some good discussion about what was the genesis, the origin of the kind of breaking of the fellowship, as it's called. I put up in the background a scene of the wizard and lion having a moment, right? So if these are the kind of alter egos or psychological kind of representations of Tolkien and Lewis in front of a maybe familiar looking wardrobe to some of you. Yeah, it introduces Lewis's own, not only writing of the space trilogy, but the Chronicles of Narnia, some of the critique from Tolkien specifically, but yeah, maybe not even implied, the explicit dynamic written into these characters of Wizard and Lion, that as they try to examine what caused some separation between the two friends, and a kind of open question, is there jealousy because of Lewis's earlier popular acclaim, especially across the Atlantic in the US? And so there's, I think, a charitable both questioning of that by these characters, but not a definitive, let's try to conclude definitively what was going on in Tolkien or Lewis during this period. But it does, each of the chapters has a quotation from another author. And there's a Chesterton quote at the beginning of chapter 6. And let me read it to you. It says, "Because our expression is imperfect, we need friendship to fill up the imperfections." And I think it's a nice way to introduce the chapter that clearly John Hendrix wants to navigate sympathetically to both Tolkien and Lewis. So beginning with acknowledging the start of World War II, talks about Lewis receiving at the kilns for girls from London, I believe, and his popularizing radio addresses that would become Mere Christianity through the BBC. There's an acknowledgement of the dynamic with Charles Williams, I believe, on page 136 and 37 there. And just an acknowledgement of, as the pages further go on, you had some of Hugo Dyson's kind of collapsing on a couch, saying no more elves when Tolkien is and the impact that environment, which began as such an inspiration, but also could have its more negative impact. And Christopher Tolkien's presence there, kind of an interesting, I didn't know much about Christopher Tolkien's role within the Inklings. So that was new to me, as he kind of took on representing some of his father's work in that group. I don't know if others would want to chime in on that at all, but I thought that was an interesting note that the author brought in. Mm-hmm. He portrays on page 145 again, and maybe the alter ego characters lend to this a little bit, but he differentiates between Tolkien and Lewis as maybe Tolkien more on the logos, the logical, analytical side of things, and Lewis more on the mythos, the kind of, he calls it story, heart, or atmosphere. And again, I think those could be both, you could argue why that's valid, but also debatable.
Maybe oversimplification.
Yeah, maybe an oversimplification. But again, he, I think, does so charitably. He's not trying to enter into scholarly debates. He's trying to introduce readers into, the different approaches that they had in their literary work, their story creation. So it mentions Lewis's student who, even after feeling very defeated by critique, Roger Lancelin Green, who had a big role in the beginnings of the Chronicles of Narnia finding publication. And as a historical story is taken over again by the Wizard and Lion, there's, I think, a good part of the discussion here between them that maybe I can read for some of us. It says, Perhaps Lewis's haste to Tolkien must have seemed almost indecent. In his mind, the fact that writing came so easily to Lewis casts suspicion on Narnia's construction, and the wizard responds, "Rubbish! Tolkien simply had never been fond of allegory, especially Christian allegory." And then the lion responds, "It must be said that for Lewis's part, he believed that the Narnia stories were more of a supposal than classic allegory." And I know our society has talked about this many times too, the back and forth, not only between Tolkien and Lewis, but, among many academics of that time, what are not only the merits or demerits of allegory, but how the popular works of Tolkien and Lewis were interpreted in their first kind of generation of reading. And so the characters find themselves, and this is from page 150, in front of the wardrobe. The notion of return, of crossing the threshold, is at the heart of the Narnia stories. It seems to be something Tolkien missed in his first critique. So right there, I would say, if we're going to say, okay, let's debate how Hendrix handles this, did Tolkien miss that or not? We could have our own debate, I'm sure, but I thought Hendrix tried to navigate it, again, in story form, in a charitable way.
I think there's an aspect that behind it there is that both of them were aware that they were kind of in a hostile culture. So for instance, I think the thing about Narnia being allegory was a way that people could dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's just Christian allegory, and it's just, it doesn't really, an allegory is out of favor right now. It's not, doesn't really speak to the real world or something. So it was dismissal there. But I think Tolkien, I think even Tolkien is being much more sensitive to this kind of potential criticism of if he wasn't perfect in his details, he was kind of, concerned about being criticized, or he put a lot of effort into, perfecting so much energy into perfecting his book world. Lewis was much more working from images and just trying to tell a story. I think there was, I don't know at what point he brings in the fact that Tolkien's Catholic kind of distinctives in his thinking kind of clashed with Lewis. He kind of felt like Lewis was sort of stepping outside the bounds that he was comfortable with, and that kind of, so there are a lot of things going on here.
Yeah. No, I think, Bob, that's also a great segue maybe into chapter 7 too, and kind of the concluding chapter. So if you don't mind, what I'll do is I'll have us finish, and then we can kind of circle back into any points of detail or discussion anyone hasn't yet brought up. So chapter 7, called Shadowlands and Grey Havens. And Mary, right away, I was just touched by the lighthouse with the tree on top here.
Fabulous.
Yeah, just again, clearly I'm a big fan of this author, but I think there is such a depth of layered meanings in a lot of these sketches. I'm on page 155, and right away I'm realizing there's an image they're walking toward, the third portal, called the Artifact Attic, where Dr. Thistle and Jean the Raccoon make their final appearance. It details some of the interesting and enjoyable details about the publication history and success of The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. But the image above it, that if you're looking at it on page 155, it's really the firmament, the kind of Ptolemaic universe artistically described, with a kind of Elendil star shooting across. And, when I first went through it, that didn't jump out at me. And it's just happening that as I look at it right now, I think John Hendrix puts so much depth of meaning in some of these illustrations. Yeah, he doesn't even touch on whether Lewis, as we've talked about, the work of Michael Ward, was influenced by the medieval planets, and yet right here in this illustration, it seems that there's maybe a wink to it. So who knows? But so much to kind of feast on in the illustrations. So the Shadowlands of Lewis's quotation, the Grey Havens of Middle Earth, where the characters sail off at the end of all things to the west. And in some ways, the final chapter of the lives of Lewis and Tolkien. And in some ways, what went unsaid, it's so interesting that Hendrix decides to end with this imagery of, as the wizard, and this is what you see on the screen, as the wizard and lion make their way up this lighthouse to the tree, they transform into their historic selves, if you will, in Tolkien and Lewis. And he writes in the acknowledgments that clearly this is speculative, but for him, he invites the reader to wonder what not only a spiritual, reconciled conversation could be like, but yeah, I almost should turn there and read the acknowledgments, the quote from the author. But the chapter details, yeah, some of the struggle, as Bob was telling us. Tolkien was concerned with Lewis's relationship with Joy Davidman and his willingness to go against even Church of England's canon law regarding marriage after divorce. And yep, we've talked a lot about, again, that relationship in our society. There's much ink spilled, I think, in here. There's again, an appropriate amount that really gives motivations from Lewis, but also why that was another kind of struggle for Tolkien in their relationship. Something I didn't know, I'm curious if any of you knew this. It says that on page 165, after their second trip, when Jack and Joy came back, that extended trip to Greece, weakened by an immediate surgery in May, taken to Ackland Nursing Home. At the very same time, Edith Tolkien was also in that same nursing home for rheumatism. I'm reading again on page 165, that lower kind of X-ray slide. It says, to this point, Lewis had never introduced Tolkien to his wife. Ironically, it was Joy and Edith who corrected this oversight. During one of Tolkien's visits, the three were unexpectedly together without Lewis for the first and only time. As far as we know, both Tolkien and Lewis pairs were never together. And it mentioned Joy's passing with Jack by her side. And maybe, again, that was something very familiar to some of you. I don't know that I had ever read about that before. So,
Nor had I.
yeah.
And I didn't even know that they had drifted apart like this as time went on. And it grieved me deeply because it seemed like a 1 in a billion kind of relationship where they dovetailed in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And why it grieved me is not so much because it happened, the drifting away, but because it sounded like they never put it on the table between them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, middle-aged men in that time and that place didn't do that sort of thing. But if they can speak to each other twice a week about literature, and to have something so precious not be addressed, and at least they can agree to disagree and still love each other.
Yeah.
I just found that terribly sad. And so I would hope that one of the messages that come away from this book is fight for those relationships and don't be afraid to expose what's going on instead of just let it happen.
It's such a great and timely word. I do want to acknowledge that our author reminds us there were little moments where clearly their affection and admiration for each other came out. Tolkien's advocacy, I think, for Lewis trying to achieve a full professorship at Oxford. And I think someone help me if I'm mistaken, or help me remember something involving Lewis's transfer from Oxford to Cambridge. Did Tolkien write something, or I'm forgetting where that is now?
There was something about that, but I don't think Lewis knew about that until, or maybe he never knew. Because Lewis died first, right? So maybe he never knew.
Mm-hmm. Anyone help us out on that detail again?
Go back to find the right page there.
Right.
Before you leave that chapter, there were a couple of things on there. You had that picture and that winding staircase or whatever up into that tower with a little tree on top.
Yes.
I have it on page 174.
Mm-hmm.
Golden key that they've unlocked the door, or this golden key is being thrown away.
Yeah, what'd you think of that, Bob?
I have to say that this reminds me of the McDonald book, The Golden Key.
Yeah, interesting. How so?
Well, there was a thing that they had, when they're toward the end of the journey, they had the golden key that unlocked the door, and then they ascended into heaven there.
Right.
The two children or whatever, or the two characters there. And
right.
he evoking that with his imagery there. He seems to be evoking that story there. And it's, of course, a story about, about one passing through death into heaven there. And the climbing stairs, sort of almost like a Jacob's ladder, the climbing the stairs, and here he very clearly marks out that transformation as they progress up that stairway there. So I just think it's another one of the things that he, that I don't know. I think Erickson must have, Lewis, of course, was very fond of McDonald there, and I think maybe he's picking up on, I think I just feel like there is an allusion to, or there seemed to be some allusion to the Golden Key and McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of our other McDonald people have any comment on that, but
No, I think that's a great observation, Bob.
One of the reasons why C.S. Lewis left Oxford and went to Cambridge was he didn't feel appreciated enough. But the real reason was there's 37 colleges and Magdalen College was not that well endowed. My daughter stayed there, and he should have, if he wanted to get a better deal, he should have gone to Christ College. They had a lot more money, but it wasn't that they slighted him. They didn't have the money to pay him what he wanted.
Oh, thanks, Harold.
he also, I thought I read something where he wrote about, or some comparison between the atmosphere that he found at Oxford and then when he came to Cambridge, that it was.
There were full professorships that came up at Oxford, and he was always passed over for them.
Right.
He was very much blackballed for a position at Oxford because of what he'd written, and Magdalen offered him one. I mean, Cambridge.
But I also think he found there was a more receptive atmosphere there when he went there. I thought I read that, was reading somewhere about that.
Well, I mean, the two go together. If they were willing to give him a full professorship,
among
more receptive to him.
And then students in the other faculty, they were not so hostile to Christianity or something.
Right.
So can I back up to that hospital story? Does he give a source for that?
He does not, as far as I can tell, Eric, but I'm looking again.
What page?
165. There's a image. The background image is almost of an X-ray. Yeah, almost Joy's rib cage behind two kind of old X-ray slides, if you will.
Yeah.
That's the lower of the X-ray slides where there's a reference.
But those are the characters. I mean, those are the alter egos, right? They're not the protagonists on 165.
And again, if they're paperback and hardcover aren't exactly the same page numbers, I'm using a hardcover. So that could be if our page numbers are slightly different.
I see 164 or something like that, but it may be a double page actually.
Sometimes to not obscure the image, they'll leave the page number off. So in mine, it doesn't actually say 165.
Oh, there it is.
164, probably 165 is obscured, but that's where they have the little blurbs about the hospital trip. I don't see there. He doesn't reference there, but it might be in his bibliography. Maybe some, I don't know, on the back page where he if there's a glossary that.
I had known they had drifted apart and had disputes over matters of religion, and then they were physically apart. With Lewis went to Cambridge, but this Hendrix does such a nice job of really highlighting the division and making it much clearer than I had ever thought of before, and then imagining a reconciliation,
right?
Which was, I thought, very satisfying. So I appreciated him.
You were saying that's heavily at the same page, the other across from the lighthouse page. You're talking about that kind of final meeting, so to speak. Is that what you were talking about, Penn?
Yeah, the whole last part is about reconciliation, I thought.
Yes. In some ways, I'll show that last image for those of you, again, who don't have a copy in front of you. There's this beautiful image with two quotes from Lewis and Tolkien there. I'll just read them. In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. Behold, we are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory. And from Lewis, now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. And there's, in some ways, on the previous pages where this kind of hypothetical reunion takes place, Lewis and Tolkien are back in front of a hearth that matches in some ways the hearth the wizard and lion begin the book at. And it's the hearth that opens almost like a doorway through pages of a book into this image that you see on the screen. So what I'm trying to say is what you had just said, Penn, but also it's demonstrated even in the art itself. So I was going to circle back to, what did Tolkien and Lewis really do for one another, even in subtlety? I was trying to find where I read that, and I was saying I was going to read some things from the acknowledgments earlier. Let me just read from page 206. As with any nonfiction adaptation, this is Hendrix writing, the hardest task is curation. As a writer, the most difficult decisions are not what you put in, but what you leave out. Despite the page count, there's much more I wish I could have included in this story of Lewis and Tolkien. Tolkien was known to carry a tiny leprechaun shoe in his pocket. How could I have left that out? Our author writes. A more notable episode cut for length was Tolkien's long-running advocacy to land Lewis an academic chair, highest academic rank, also called a professorship. Lewis was a fellow or a don, also called a tutor for many years at Oxford. Many believe it was one of Tolkien's finest hours in their friendship. Despite Lewis's numerous accomplishments, he was often passed over at Oxford, as we were saying earlier, for religious and political reasons. Tolkien felt this was a grave injustice, and even as their friendship grew brittle in the 50s, Tolkien was Lewis's most fierce and vocal advocate. After years of missed votes at Oxford, they finally succeeded at rival University Cambridge. Lewis joined a new Magdalen College, installed as chair of medieval and Renaissance English at Cambridge on October 1st of 54. I cut this for length and clarity in the overall narrative. And there's a letter which I think in an earlier chapter after The Lord of the Rings is published, there's asterisks by it. So on page 152, where you see Lewis writing a tear-filled letter of congratulations to Tolkien. Let us praise hobbits. I congratulate you. I wondered at the bottom, but I assume this is authentic, where he writes, I miss you very much. Yours, Jack Lewis. So even in the parting of ways in some sense, there remains care, and their friendship lingered in some ways as well. So again, our earlier comments about the need to continue to speak in friendship. Dan writes in the comments, men in general don't talk about their friendships with their friends. We just enjoy them. Well, Dan, I enjoy my friendship with you, and I want to say it here on Zoom at the C.S. Lewis Society meeting of California. So there we go.
Same here.
And with many of you as well.
Lewis wrote 2 reviews of the Fellowship of the Ring and 1 review of the 2 Towers.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very laudatory. They were very appreciative. I don't have those to hand. I was looking at them a while ago, and I can't remember in what context, so I can't find them right away. But I remember being impressed by them, both for the quality. Lewis, you'd expect good quality reviews from Lewis as a literature critic, but also the friendship and the enjoyment of that friendship. The good parts of their relationship never disappeared, even though they physically and theologically and socially separated.
Yeah, I'd say it was more a drifting apart than a parting of the ways.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they ever lost their friendship. It's just that they grew older. And that intensity that they had during the war years did not last, but it didn't last for anyone, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric.
Mark, I have the reviews here of Tolkien, just a few phrases from it.
Mm-hmm.
Starts out, this book is like lightning from a clear sky. Nothing quite like it was ever done before. And he winds up saying, this book is too original and too opulent for any final judgment on a first reading, but we know at once that it has done things to us. We are not quite the same men. And though we must ration ourselves in our rereadings, I have little doubt that the book will soon take its place among the indispensables.
Wonderful.
And that was 1955. I think he speaks as a prophet there.
As promised, everybody, here is John Hendrix postcard sent in, what was it called again? COVID. They had some name for it. So the Rabbit Room friends, instead of an in-person Hutchmoot that was happening in Nashville, they sent it out, and I got one box in California, and this is what was in it. So it says Rabbit Room in the roots here, and yeah, different tree pen than the one in the Tree of Tales and in the Mythmakers book, but you can definitely see the similarities in style, vivid in detail of John Hendrix artwork. And so that was one of the first times I saw his artwork. And so, yeah, when I bumped into it later, I was equally captivated. Highly encourage you to check out his website and some of his other work. There was a nice deal from Amazon where you could get all 3 bundled. So I ended up, these are the other 2 that were on the screen earlier. And this Holy Ghost, A Spirited Comic, is actually really funny. So we have some time to discuss the book in more detail if there's something that
I found the Lewis reviews. There they are.
I wanted to know if we want to at least sometime the question of what can we learn from this friendship?
Well, Bob, you asked it. What would you say or want to hear from others?
Well, is there a lesson for us in terms of kind of friendship they had, or what was involved in there? I mean, it's one thing to read about and just understand a little bit the history of it there, but kind of also, is there something that had, just as their books have meaning beyond it? Is this narrative about the friendship and the nature of their friendship? Is that something we can learn from, particularly in our era today, where that seems to be an increasingly fragile and rare commodity?
To me, what it underlines the most is the importance of having meaningful conversations and not frittering your time away in minutia or gossip or whatever, having deep and meaningful conversations with people. It was their conversations that changed Lewis's life and have impacted the lives of thousands of millions.
And Tolkien.
Yeah.
I just learned a lot of little details. But I enjoyed the illustrations. I enjoyed the alter ego back and forth, but I learned Lewis only had 1 joint on his thumb. The box of dirt and plants I thought was fabulous. The unexpected stab of joy. Is that what becomes Sehnsucht later?
Yeah.
That the tutor, that the great Knock, Kirkpatrick, was his father's tutor also. I thought that was really cool, that his father had such a valuable experience that when his sons were so unhappy at their boarding schools, he finally noticed that and sent them to this guy, his tutor, the tutor that he had benefited from in his youth.
Well, Warney liked it. It was Jack who didn't like it.
Yeah. My father did a similar thing to me, which is why I really liked that, because he sent me to a camp that he had gone to in his youth in Virginia. There was 8 weeks long and no parents. You're out in the woods. It was like boot camp, but you learned a lot, and it was a very worthwhile experience. But he sent me to the same camp he went to.
But thinking more about the parting of the ways, an obvious distancing between Tolkien and Lewis was when Lewis went to Cambridge, right? It's hard to have conversations every day with someone that lives in a different city. I mean, he did come back to Oxford to live on the weekends, but they didn't have that day-to-day, everyday meeting that they were used to when they were both in Oxford. So, I mean, that's another indication of, not that they were unfriendly, it's just that they didn't see each other that much anymore. So that probably came into it also.
To add to what you're saying, Eric, I wondered, I'm trying to think back, I was in Indiana by Dan Hamilton and friends, and there was some discussion about, what did Lewis refer to it as, the oh hell, all of his work on the history of the English, the Oxford history of the English language, and
16th century excluding drama.
I have that book.
as their teaching careers, along with their, popular success and all the letter writing they were doing, increased, their for Tolkien, it's family life on top of academic life. For Lewis, it's, just increasing notoriety. Those trajectories, not only as, many of us find in friendships as we age, just the workload and what's on our plate in life is probably a contributing factor.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I'm saying parting of the ways is, I think, a little bit too strong.
I wondered about that with the author and in the desire to kind of frame the narrative. Do you think, though, Eric or others, that there is grounds for recognizing that there was a significant change, though, in their
Yes, and
Well,
I thought he
yeah.
did a good job with it. He didn't paint it as animosity.
right?
I mean, Tolkien denigrated the Narnia stories, which I'm sure Lewis didn't appreciate, but in defense of your earlier point about the weight of life, I mean, Lewis had Mrs. Moore, he had his brother's alcoholism, he had
Mm-hmm.
to answer hundreds of letters by hand every day, plus being a tutor. That's a hard life.
The guys were workaholics.
Yeah.
They really were. I mean, I remember someone once figured out what was Tolkien's normal day like. He'd get up at 6 and get home maybe about midnight, right? And then he'd write. Right? So yeah, they were just workaholics.
Well, passionate. I prefer the term passionate to workaholism, as if it's something
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm curious, for those of you who were able to procure a copy and enjoy its portrayal here. Yeah, how much of it was, oh, I've read about that, heard that before. How much of it was new? And I have so appreciate how many of you have contributed. I'm curious, for those of you who haven't commented yet, anyone have just some thoughts on your experience of reading it or information that you learned through it?
Thanks for bringing it up as a topic. My sister gave it to me earlier this year as a present, not knowing that it was on my list of, I probably want to buy that someday. And I sat down and started reading it, thinking, this is a comic book, glorified comic book. This will be light reading for 45 minutes or so. And I got into it and realized this is not light reading. I put it back on my stack and didn't get back to it till Alice here was at our conference early this week and said, oh, the West Coast group's going to be talking about that very book this week. So okay, I better get it out and go through it again. So thanks for being a guide through it. You pointed out a few things I missed.
Yeah, I had not heard of it until you guys put it on the agenda. So thank you for that.
I'll echo that too. Thank you, Mark.
There's new information that I hadn't seen in some of the other biographies, but also
good.
I think the other aspect was that the way he kind of there's not a lot of works where the two of them are that closely set in parallel with each other. You can read the story about Tolkien, you can read stories about Lewis there, but the interaction between them, there are a couple of books that have chapters about that, but this is kind of interweaving them through so much of the book there, I think could have provided a perspective too that I think is kind of relatively uncommon or fairly novel there.
We have an observation from Esma, who's here in person.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Growing up reading Lewis and a lot of Greek mythology, I always saw the references, but I couldn't understand why a Christian man would include a lot of Greek mythology in his stories. This makes more sense now. So
yeah, wonderful comment. I remember seeing on my parents were fortunate to have gone to college, and so they had all these books that they read as a part of a bachelor's degree in liberal arts, and one of them was this book on mythology by Edith Hamilton. Anybody else read Edith Hamilton's book on mythology? So I felt like Lewis describing his younger days, sometimes going through my parents' books that they kept from their college experience. And one of them was Edith Hamilton's book on mythology. And I didn't really know what was in my hands when I was kind of a younger man. And I had a similar as my kind of experience, like why would Christian believers, you know, I mean, and it is not always, how should we put it, age appropriate material, shall we say. The ancient world was not as concerned as we seem to be about what youth can appropriately, you know, process. And I find the way in which the Inklings framed the history of mythology and the way in which it opens up truth. And even the discussion at the beginning of this book, particularly on myth and its relationship to, you know, the great tree of story, but the other types of literature. I almost want to teach in Sunday school here at our church with many of our members, because it's such a great introduction to how we use these words and what do we mean. So yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on that great topic? Yeah, Julie.
Well,
Yeah, but I'd like to point out there's a
Oh.
whole bunch of the Bible that's not child appropriate.
I know, right?
So
Exactly.
Yep.
well, one of the things that I was that brought home to me is this sort of idea of enchantment, and like how we, like with children's stories and I mean, my mom read a lot of fairy tales to me and a lot of the Bible. That was our two things. So I started thinking about how it opened up that portal and that opening so that your heart is both reason and enchantment and beauty. And so, and heart and mind and these things. So I think that's what's so lovely about stories and how they touch our hearts, and they can be an opening to truth. So
Thanks, Julie. And I think back to Mary's point, you know, having conversations. How do we talk about first things, first principles? An academic lecture appeals to some of us because of, you know, inborn personality, genetics. That's just the way we think and order things. How powerful is storytelling to open us up to timeless truths? And that these aren't mutually exclusive. It's just that these are ways we've been designed. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Great.
well, I think it kind of boils down to the reason why myths are still around and we still read them is because they're very important stories,
Yeah.
right? They had Harlequin romances in the Greek world, but no one has them, right? It's like those you leave behind, but the really important stories, the stories that speak to our soul about what this world, what it's all about, right? And I think that's why Tolkien and Lewis were so attracted to it, because they were touching on things that spoke directly to their soul. And then it's like, okay, so how do we fuse Christianity with these tales, right? And I think that's what they did, right?
There's a great book that we use in classical education called Norms and Nobility. And the whole premise of Norms and Nobility is the fusion of the mythos and the logos, which they touch on in Mythmakers, is when you have the mythos, when you have these great stories of character and people and morality told through tales, and you mix it with the logos, which is the virtue that comes from Christian living, you have the proper ideas of classical education. And so we actually have a whole article that my homeschool puts out on why we read pagan literature, because there are people who are afraid of these concepts, even though they are great storytellers and they're teaching our children character and values and all of these things. And my son read Theogony this summer because it's a part of his reading list. And he was like, oh, this story it's all about gods and who they were doing it with. And I was like, kind of a little bit. I mean, and he's 17. That's how he puts it, you know. He'll hopefully be a little more eloquent as he gets older and explains things to his kids. But that's he's seeing these stories and he's putting them in a context where he has this very strong Christian worldview, but he gets to look at why were people writing these stories the way they are, and why do they matter to these societies? And so that you can't get away from our history and then pretend you can just make a new culture out of something. Like
Right.
it's all based in something that has value that we can add to. I think that's why Tolkien's statement where he says myth, you know, the Jesus is the, I think I wrote it down, but the idea was, he said Jesus is I absolutely read it down.
Is
Is the myth that actually came true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on page 94. And I think that's what we need to teach. We don't shy away from history and these great stories. We step into them, and then we show this worldview where we have truth involved. So it's not just beauty, it is truth as well.
Well, it's like, yeah, and it's, as Jesus told the disciples on the road to Emmaus and explained to them how everything in the Old Testament was leading up to him. All of these myths are pointing to Jesus as the true myth.
Right.
They don't get it. They don't get us there fully, but they point us there.
Right.
And my favorite thing about that story was Jesus was going to keep walking.
Yeah.
And they said, how about if you have dinner with us? And I think that is so indicative, right? Like Jesus was like, okay, I'm on my way. No, how about if you stick around a little bit, right? I just love that part of the story.
Mark Wimbush, you're unmuted.
Yes, I was going to ask, was it you, Mark, that mentioned that Lewis had given very complimentary reviews of Tolkien's work? Do you happen to know whether Tolkien ever reviewed publicly Lewis's work?
Someone help Mark and I out with more information.
I would doubt it.
Tolkien wasn't a critic. I mean, that wasn't what he did. So I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't anything.
I'm hoping someone is rapidly Googling while we're wondering. My friend Andrew Doja, I have enjoyed seeing that you're back on video and wondering if there's at least something from, Barfield in here that we can quick, 5 minutes.
I'm exhausted thinking about the possibilities of discerning our friend Owen Barfield. I don't think there's anything that comes to mind, although I was beginning to do a little quick review to see if there were some reviews by Tolkien, but it looks like there are 4 or 5. He does a commentary on the Chronicles of Narnia, but it sounds like it was more in private letters rather than published. And then he does, he wrote a letter to the Observer in response to a review of The Hobbit, and he used a pseudonym. And this is what ChatGPT says, but it says, Tolkien famously wrote a letter to the Observer anonymously reviewing The Hobbit, his own book, under a pseudonym, praising the story as if he were a reader. This was more a playful publicity move, not an academic review, but there does appear to be one, which is an essay-style commentary on.
Well, that's him reviewing himself.
Correct, but you can't say that he didn't review a book if he wrote a review.
Oh,
So how's that? I wonder if maybe it's fair to say that he didn't necessarily do reviews, but when he advocated for certain types of books to be read, like his work of we did it last year. Beowulf, right? So when he wrote Beowulf, when he did his interpretation of Beowulf, he was effectively being an advocate for it. So he was in a sense doing a review of ancient literature that was worth reviewing, but he didn't do reviews as a regular matter, as did Lewis. That's the best I can give you.
Andrew, that's great. It reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier about Till We Have Faces. And again, Esma, your comment that got us in this great discussion about myth and Christian faith, I think Lewis's work towards maybe his last published work, if I'm not mistaken, Till We Have Faces, which he also benefited from the insight from Joy Davidman on, very much so, was a retelling from the ancient Roman story, Apuleius and the Golden Ass, the Cupid and Psyche myth. And it's this beautiful, again, imaginative interpretation of personal transformation told through the lens of that original embedded myth within the Roman Harlequin novel, as you call it, Eric. And for those who could say way much more than I am and better, Till We Have Faces is just a wonderful
Right.
gift.
Remarkably does it through the persona of a female. That's one of the most remarkable.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
So
Lewis's last published work was Letters to Malcolm.
Oh.
And it's interesting. The very last sentence is till Saturday. And I mean, once you read Planet Narnia, you realize who Saturn is. He's seeing his death. It says it right there. Really interesting.
And that's the next book we're reading. This is a
It
great
is.
segue. We're
Right.
at 9 o'clock, and the book we're reading in 2 weeks and discussing is Letters to Malcolm. And now you know the last sentence.
Right.
So read the first several sentences. Mark, we thank you for staying up till midnight.
It's been a joy, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
This was marvelous, and thank you for introducing us to this book. I think we all enjoyed it a great deal, and those who have not yet read it, I think hopefully are inspired this evening to read it.
Find a young person in your life to gift it to, but borrow before after you give it to them.
Can I just jump in with one comment about his last published books? Till We Have Faces was the last book published, non-fiction book published in his lifetime. Letters to Malcolm followed after his death, as did The Discarded Image a year after that. And then Screwtape Proposed the Toast as an addendum to Screwtape Letters, also posthumous.
I stand corrected in orthopedic shoes.
You sit corrected.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. We see you all.
Gift.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you very much.